Which Miami Dolphins have the highest stakes entering into 2024? We are looking at that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. We don't just say it, we live it. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets with the lowest prices guaranteed. The Miami Dolphins are entering into a expected to be competitive season in 2024, but a season that has a lot of remodeling that's been done to the roster on both sides of the football. When you consider the offensive line, all three levels of the defense, really, the coaching staff. And I thought it would be a good time of year to kind of zoom out and ask the question, who has a lot riding on this season? Because I think these players are important to identify because they can be critical pivot pieces as far as their performance and their incentive to perform at the highest possible level beyond just, well, I play football for a living, right? So I have the Dolphins depth chart up, and I also have their multi-year salary cap table up. And the thought process here is guys that are either in contract years or are in years in which they are coming up on the last of their guaranteed financial security with the team, I suppose, are players that kind of jump to the top of your list here, right? Because as a player, you put yourself in the player's shoes. They want to maximize their value for as long as they possibly can. And long-term stability with a contract with a lot of guaranteed money is one of the primary incentives and drivers. Now, if the Dolphins don't get a contract extension done with Tua Tagovailoa, this conversation's very short, right? The player who has the highest stakes entering into 2024 would be your 25-year-old quarterback who led the league in passer rating and yards in each of the last 2 years, respectively, who is in a contract year trying to make the team pay for not getting a long-term contract extension done by performing at the peakest of levels and set himself up for either the franchise tag, which is a 1-year fully guaranteed payment, which it's kind of hard to be mad about, but there's no long-term security with it. Or alternatively, put yourself at the highest possible stock before renegotiating in the offseason / potentially hitting the open market. I don't expect that's going to happen. I expect the contract extension will get done in the next probably 6 weeks at some point. I'm sure they will wait until I'm not at the house for the extension news for Tua and the Dolphins to drop. But if they don't get a contract extension done, the answer to this question is Tua, right? But if they do get a contract extension done, and assuming something happens with Tyreek Hill, right? That's another contract where he's owed $19 million in cash this season. That's the last of his current guaranteed money on the contract. He would like to. It's been reported by a number of different places. Drew Rosenhaus has kind of hinted and alluded at it. Tyreek's kind of hinted and alluded at it. They'd like it addressed, right? Assuming those two things happen, I think this is where the conversation actually gets pretty interesting. Because offensively, despite the fact that the team gave a contract extension to Raheem Mostert, I kind of feel like he's near the top of the list for offensive veteran players. So Raheem Mostert is coming off of a franchise record-setting season. Incredible performance last year for Raheem Mostert. One of my favorite players on the team because of his journey and his story. But Raheem Mostert is 32 years old. This season, he will be 33 next season, which is the new last year of his current contract after he signed the one-year contract extension earlier this offseason. They gave him a pay raise, but one thing that didn't really happen is they didn't give financial security beyond this season. And you consider Raheem and how good he's been, and he's been phenomenal the 2 years he's been in Miami. He hasn't been available at the end of the year. He's dealt with some lower body injuries, not season enders like he dealt with earlier in his career. And he's taken on a bigger workload the past 2 seasons than he had ever had in his career before. So don't say that as a slight to Raheem. But you're talking about somebody who will be a 33-year-old running back next offseason, going into the 2025 season, who would be in a contract year with a salary cap hit of over $4 million. And the team could move on from Raheem Mostert after this upcoming offseason or after this upcoming season and only carry a $1 million dead cap hit. They just spent 2 third-round picks in the last 2 years on running backs. So that, for me, is that's the cruel world business nature of the NFL. Raheem Mostert's got a lot to prove this season. In spite of everything he's done and the records he's set for this franchise. Because he's a 33-year-old running back at a position that traditionally has not aged well, with a significant cap hit, but a cap hit that's not going to kill you by any means, yet a cap hit that you can save 75% of if you moved on from the player. And you've invested 2 third-round picks in the last 2 off seasons in other players at the position. If Jalen Wright comes in and performs productively with whatever opportunities he gets this season, the drumbeat, you might hear it. So Raheem Mostert is a player for me that I look at the depth chart. I look at the intersection of where he's at in his respective career, who else is in the position room, what he's done, what his financial situation is as a player under contract. And I think he's got a little bit of pressure and some high stakes this season to say, look, you guys will have cost-saving avenues to explore next offseason. I shouldn't be one of them because I'm still performing at the highest of high levels. And I'm still playing at the caliber of what I played in 2023 when I ripped your single-season touchdown record to shreds. That's where I look at Raheem Mostert, and I think that's a player that's got a little something coming into the season ahead. I'm not sure for the rest of the offense if there's another player who I think makes more sense than Durham Smythe, if I was going to point to a veteran offensive player, because they have infused into this room now, right? They signed Jonnu Smith. They add Jody Fortson. And they've kind of reworked Durham Smythe's contract. They restructured him this year to get a little bit of salary cap space. That's another player with a $4 to $5 million cap hit next year that the Dolphins could save a pretty significant amount of money from if they moved on from Durham Smythe. They could save over $2.5 million or over $2 million if they moved on from Durham Smythe. And that's a player who's going to be 30 next season, hasn't ever really been a productive receiving player. They've kind of gone after some different players. They do carry a fullback in Alec Ingold who can kind of create some overlap. Not that he's going to play with his hand in dirt. So those are a couple of players that are kind of middle-class talents that I think have some pretty high stakes because they're entering into contract years with low amounts of guaranteed money left on the table for them. And they're at rooms that the Dolphins have invested in. And those guys are the incumbents. So that's, for me, the offensive veterans that stand out the most. We're going to get into the defensive side of the ball next, and then a couple rookie contract players that maybe don't get shout out in the next segment. So make sure you stick with us. Going to the game is not supposed to be stressful, and Well, who knows? We might not get another Stanley Cup final here based on how the Florida Panthers have played the first two games against the Edmonton Oilers. But if the Stanley Cup final does come back to South Florida, get your tickets with Game Time. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you could save up to 60% off with last minute deals for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have flash and zone deals to help you save even more. And with all in pricing, you can see the total cost before you put the tickets into your cart, so there's no surprise fees when you go to check out. They also offer a panoramic view seating, so you know what your sight lines are before you buy the tickets. You can get the tickets delivered directly to your phone with just a few taps when you buy your tickets with Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today for last minute tickets for the lowest prices guaranteed. Defensively, players with a lot on the line. I would look to the veterans in the edge rush room. And I think there's some stakes there based on what has been invested. When you consider Jalen Phillips, they exercised his fifth-year option, but he's coming off of an injury. Bradley Chubb coming off of an injury of his own. They restructured that contract this year to buy some space, but they left a little bit of meat on the bone as far as what they could have done with that contract. They left $6 million in base salary. They left about another $5 million that they could have redistributed and kicked out across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. They could have saved another $4 million with what they did with Bradley Chubb's contract versus what they actually did. Why do you do that? And give yourself a little bit more financial out flexibility for after the season. They, of course, used a first-round pick in Chop Robinson. They have Muhammad Kamara, who's in the picture for them as well. So that for me, and Bradley Chubb, just to kind of reiterate the updated exit ramps off that contract, they can move on from Bradley Chubb next offseason at any point, no questions asked, and save $2 million against the cap. If they wanted to do a June 1st type of transition away from Bradley, if, say, Kamara and Phillips looks fully healthy and Chop Robinson's everything you hope he'd be the first-round pick, you could move post June 1st next offseason from Bradley Chubb and save over $20 million in cap space in 2024 or 2025. So there's an exit ramp that still exists with Bradley Chubb, and that's a testament to the way that they originally structured the contract, because they've restructured him twice now, in 2023 and 2024. Hopefully Bradley Chubb's back and performing at a high level, so that it's a no-brainer to keep that as one of the nucleus core assets of the team. But I do think about Chubb with his injury history and Chubb coming off of an injury. And I think Chubb was like the most consistent defensive player on the field other than like Jalen Ramsey last season. Like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm ready to move on from Bradley Chubb, but I do think anytime that you are in that stratosphere of a contract, and again, the team is investing other players into the room to kind of set the table for the transition if they want to make it, that's where things get a little dicey. One thing to note for Bradley Chubb, his 2025 salary, we're talking about kind of expiration of guaranteed money. He does have $10 million in salary guaranteed, but it is guaranteed for injury. So if you cut him with an injury designation, if like he fails a physical, he would be guaranteed $10 million of his salary, which could complicate those matters a little bit. But as you look at the rest of the defense and names that have a little something to prove, I don't know that this is going to get resolved in season or not. And I also don't know what your appetite is if you're the Dolphins to continue to pay another player at this position, because they just gave out a pretty decent sized contract. But how about David Long? David Long stayed healthy for 17 games after Mike Vrabel just verbally berated this guy in every press conference opportunity he had to be asked about David Long. David Long played all 17 games was really good for the Dolphins this past year. And I think there's more opportunity for him to be an even more impactful player in this scheme, because there's going to be more pressure opportunities. David Long's really good at that. I think his passing down resume in Tennessee was better than what he showed this past year in Miami. He really kind of acclimated himself to fitting against the run as the season wore on, and got a lot better there. I think he was really good as far as feeling where gaps were going to be and when to have his opportunities to get down in the line of scrimmage. So David Long, contract year, 28 years old, probably his last opportunity to get a nice size contract. He will turn 28 in October. So this is a player who is maybe looking at the last big contract at a position that historically does not get big contracts. And you're looking to capitalize on kind of the power transition that's happened defensively, where a lot of the old guard of established veteran leadership in Miami is no longer here, between Jerome Baker and Xavier Howard and Christian Wilkins. Like, David Long might be one of them dudes for this Dolphins team. And if that's the case, if he comes into the season without anything that's done and updated and an extension that's provided, he's got a lot at stake. He's going to have an opportunity, and to stay healthy 2 years in Miami would be a big time feather in his cap to say, look, I've done my part. I stayed healthy. I performed at a high level. I kind of became the one of the leaders of this unit over the past 2 seasons. I'm in the prime of my career. Let's make it happen. I think Miami financially will be in a position to do something with David Long if they want to do something with David Long, but he's currently set and owed $4.5 million in cash this season. I think relative to this past year's linebacker market, with guys like Frankie Louvu getting over $10 million, you get a nice steal. And we felt that was a good contract when they signed David Long. I didn't project the Dolphins. I was projecting the Dolphins last offseason to get Drew Tranquil because I didn't think David Long was going to be in a price point for them to sign him. Well, they took advantage of the injury question mark that exists with the hamstring issue that he dealt with seemingly on a monthly basis in Tennessee, and it came through. Now, a couple rookie contract guys we're going to shout out on the other side of the break. Make sure that you stick with us. I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody if I said that Javon Holland had a lot riding on this 2024 season. A player from the 2021 draft class who has had moments of being and looking like a superstar. And the safety market just experienced its biggest jolt in quite some time, courtesy of Antoine Winfield Jr. and the contract that he got from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which put him as not just the league's highest paid safety, it put him as the league's highest paid defensive back, which is pretty unprecedented position to be in. As far as safeties have generally been considered the lesser of the defensive back talent that's available, but at $21.025 million, Antoine Winfield checks in front of Jair Alexander, Denzel Ward, and Marshawn Lattimore. Marlon Humphrey, Trayvon Diggs is the rest of the top 6. Well, it's all corners. The next safety on this list was Derwin James on a deal that has not aged particularly gracefully. And then you have L'Jarius Sneed, Jalen Johnson, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Jalen Ramsey. That's the current hierarchy of safety contracts in the NFL. Now, as you work your way down the rest of the safeties themselves, and not just those that rank in the top 12 of defensive back contracts, Winfield at 21, Derwin James at 19, Minkah Fitzpatrick at 18, And then this year's free agent signing of Xavier McKinney at 16 3/4, Jesse Bates at 16. Javon Holland has an opportunity to create the argument that he belongs in this stratosphere. I think from a plays made perspective, he is probably comparable to Xavier McKinney. The question that I have is Miami going to play ball in that stratosphere of finances for a safety? We've seen this team, these iterations of the Dolphins franchise. They've paid quarterbacks, they've paid wide receivers, they've paid edge rushers, offensive tackles, they've paid corners. But big contracts at safety isn't really something we've seen them do. And that's not to say that they wouldn't do it. And I think that's where, as far as Javon Holland having a lot at stake this season, proving yourself to be an invaluable piece that belongs as an unquestioned long-term premium investment player, which he's capable of being. And he has shown at times that he's that level of player. But Antoine Winfield Jr., I think is, and we've discussed this on the show before, I think there is a bit of a gap between his resume and Javon's resume right now that warrants resetting the defensive back market versus being in line with Xavier McKinney as somebody who's around $16 million per season. So for Javon, Miami has their negotiation tactics. I think we're on to a little bit at this stage of the game is they make an offer they feel is where they're appropriate budgeting for the player based on their talent, right? And I don't know where the negotiations are with Javon, but when Javon spoke at OTAs, it didn't sound like there was a lot of traction towards getting something done. And this is probably in part because the Tua Tagovailoa contract, they want to know what that big piece is before they know what pieces to put around it. But for Javon Holland, this upcoming season being the contract year at a position that Miami hasn't paid a lot to historically, kind of creates this split in philosophy that they're going to have to, they're either going to stick to their guns and you're going to hope that whatever offers you're willing to offer Javon Holland are in the stratosphere of where he feels valued and appreciated and wants to sign, or they're just simply going to have a transition there. And, Javon Holland is, I know a lot of people love Javon. I love Javon as a player. I love Javon as a personality. He's fun, but he's also very good at what he does. And that is realizing that and making the leap this season is where I think he has a lot at stake, whether it is from Miami or it is from somebody else. Now, if you anticipate that that's going to happen, it may behoove you to proactively get these contracts done. And the Dolphins have gotten a few done in the summertime the past couple of seasons. Zach Sealers was the big one last year. We expect Jalen Waddle and Tua Tagovailoa to be the two first ones done this offseason. Do you have more in the well? And if you do, I think the one that you have the most incentive to get something done with, provided that you as the Dolphins envision him as a long-term piece of your puzzle, is Javon Holland. I think that would be the next one that I would be knocking on the door on. That is going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, Dolphins players with the most at stake entering 2024. We had veteran players like Durham Smythe and Raheem Mostert. We had defensive players like Bradley Chubb and David Long. And then we have a rookie contract player in Javon Holland who has superstar potential and is entering into a contract year. That's where we stand here on Locked On Dolphins with those players most at stake. Come on back and see us again soon. Look forward to talking more Dolphins football with you. We can find it on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Fins up.